You're listening to Real Life, No Filter, where raw emotions and real moments take center stage. No masks, no filters. Just honest stories about life, love, and everything in between. Get comfortable. We're about to begin. It was a wonderful autumn afternoon. Under the azure sky, the trees, dressed in gold and crimson attire, radiated a soft, warm glow. The transparent air was intoxicatingly fresh, carrying the scents of damp earth and fallen leaves. In the old park, sitting on a bench, a man watched a large Labrador. The dog, with luxurious golden fur shining under the rays of the unusually bright autumn sun, was running with visible pleasure between the tree trunks over a carpet of colourful leaves. Suddenly, he stopped abruptly and, with a running start, dove into a pile of fallen leaves, burying himself head first and raising a whirlwind of colours around him. Crouching low to the ground, the dog froze and stared at his owner. "Why are you sitting there as if you've grown roots? Come here, let's jump together. It's so great," the dog's gaze seemed to say. The dog exhaled noisily several times, trying to free his nose from clinging cobwebs and leaf particles, then picked up a small twig and dashed towards the bench. "Well, Sammy." The owner gently stroked the dog's back near the shoulders and carefully wiped the cobweb from his nose. "You're like a puppy today." The dog lifted his muzzle, and huge, shining eyes fixed on the owner's face. His tail thumped a frantic rhythm, his whole body trembling with impatience. Crouching, he raised a paw, looking at the man questioningly, and gently pulled. "Calm down," the man laughed cheerfully. "What's gotten into you today? Did you come to play with me?" "No, I can't. It will pass. Soon others will be jumping here, but around me." He laughed softly again, but now there was bitterness in the laughter. "If only Ethan were with us. He would run with you." The man suddenly fell silent, his face contorted as if in pain, and he added, forcing the words out with difficulty, "And if Olivia were with us, I'm sure she would have happily jumped with you. I remember all your tricks. Olivia taught you, remember?" The dog, hearing the sounds of the beloved voice and familiar names, yelped with joy, wagged his tail furiously, and sat down next to the bench, still holding the broken twig in his teeth. Evidently, he hadn't given up hope of involving his owner in a cheerful game. However, just sitting nearby, feeling the touches, he was clearly happy. The man, continuing to automatically stroke the dog, running his fingers through its silky ears, took a deep breath of the autumn scent and closed his eyes. Memories, bright and dark, joyful and sad, washed over him in a wave. The family lived modestly. His mother worked as a librarian, joking that she managed to retire before the internet destroyed her profession. His father, a foreman at a factory, spent his free time reading newspapers, suspiciously watching his wife, and demanding good grades from his son. Arthur loved his mother tenderly, and his father. He loved with a strange, forced love, and was a little afraid of him. George seemed alien, incomprehensible, unkind. It was terrible, but Arthur couldn't change his attitude. Perhaps, as he grew older, he might have been able to understand his relative better, to build a relationship. But there wasn't enough time for that. George died suddenly. 9-year-old Arthur was left with his mother, who after George's death grieved as if she had lost not a gloomy, perpetually dissatisfied husband, who constantly suspected her of mythical infidelities, but a loving person. After school, Arthur enrolled in the institute to study engineering. He doubted his choice. His uncle Frank, his mother's brother, who owned a small car repair shop where he fixed and resold cars, came to his rescue. All this tinsel, all these little lawyers and merchants, it's all like this. Needed today, gone tomorrow, he rumbled in his smoke-stained baritone, listening to his nephew. And what kind of business, God forgive me, is it for a real man, shuffling papers and cheating others? Bah! But what I have, that's real, man's work. Uncle Frank straightened up proudly and began to thump his chest with his considerable fist, stained with indelible oil. And I'll always have clients and work. I'll always earn a piece of bread and butter, and even caviar if I want. And you, Art, come work for me. I'll set you up. You'll start doing what they just feed you in theory at your institutes. Plus, you'll start earning some money, however little. Stop living off your mother. This was a weighty argument. Arthur had long been trying to earn some money, but all of it, combined with his mother's modest pension and his even more modest student stipend, was barely enough to live on. Working at his uncle's shop somehow clicked for Arthur right away. He turned out to be a person with innate technical ingenuity and intuition. He was interested in everything he saw and did there. He wanted to know and be able to do more. Yes, Art, you've got hands that know what they're doing, his uncle would say. With those hands and a little more brains, you'd be priceless. Keep studying, he would bark sternly as a disciplinary measure. Arthur studied easily and with pleasure. In the evenings and on weekends, he worked in the shop, quickly gaining practical experience. After just a year, he was calmly entrusted with independent car repairs, starting with simple cases, but over time, increasingly responsible and complex ones. Time flew by quickly, and 5 years later, by the time he finished the institute, Arthur Bennett was already an accomplished master, who, despite his youth, enjoyed considerable authority among car owners, constantly worried about endless breakdowns. Artie, that's wonderful. I'm so happy. I'm so proud of you. His mother beamed with pride, stroking her son's brand new diploma. It's a very proper profession for a man. Yeah, Mom. You think so? Arthur looked at his mother playfully. But if I were a lawyer now, that would be more prestigious. And my hands would be clean, he added, looking at his palms, covered in calluses, small abrasions, and indelible oil stains. Nonsense, son, that's rubbish. My dear brother Frank talks too much, of course, but he's right about this. You have a wonderful man's profession. His mother smiled. Don't laugh, Artie. But I always thought the ideal family was a husband who's an engineer and a wife who's a doctor. Mom, you're something else. Arthur burst out laughing. Why a doctor, specifically? Come on, that's silly. I, for one, will definitely never, under any circumstances, be able to love a woman who's a doctor. I think they're all cold. Son and mother laughed cheerfully and were happy. The categorical way Arthur judged female doctors was not accidental. It was difficult to explain, but something connected with medicine caused him unpleasant feelings from early childhood. Artie desperately avoided going to the clinic, screamed during appointments, and hid from the pediatrician called to the house. As an adult, Arthur never went to doctors, being a healthy person, and completely convinced that a cough and a runny nose were no reason to die. He habitually ignored medicine, just as he ignored seasonal colds. However, this time he couldn't avoid visiting medical institutions. He needed certificates to renew his driver's license. Who's last? Arthur asked, approaching the office door where others like himself were sitting along the wall, suffering. Not last, but next. I am, one of them muttered, and, receiving no response, looked up at Arthur. You'll be after me. Hey, you'll be after me. Can you hear me? Man, are you deaf? He tried indignantly to get Arthur's attention. But Arthur heard and saw nothing around him except an incredible, almost unearthly creature, walking, or rather gliding, down the shabby clinic corridor. The magical vision, in the form of a short, fragile young woman in a white coat, fluttered past the frozen Arthur and disappeared behind the office door. He sank bewildered onto a chair next to the angry next man and suddenly felt his heart pounding. He entered the office in a semi-conscious state, glad it wasn't an appointment. A young woman sat at the table by the window, and the sun's rays, tangling in strands of reddish hair, created a halo effect above her head. "Hello? Come in? Have a seat." A voice that seemed angelic to Arthur sounded. "Are you complaining about anything? Are you taking any medications?" she asked, without lifting her head and quickly writing something on the form before her. "What?" Arthur asked foolishly, unable to tear his eyes away from the doctor's golden glow. "Are you taking any medications?" She lifted her head and looked closely at his face. Arthur's breath caught, blood rushed to his cheeks, and his legs trembled. What? That was all the poor man could stammer out. "All right, Arthur Bennett," she said, looking at his documents. "You're behaving, to put it mildly, a bit strangely. What's wrong?" She looked very carefully at his face again. "I love you, Doctor," Arthur said, bewildered. The doctor, Dr. Olivia Davies, as her badge read, froze. Her professionally focused face suddenly became bewildered. "Do you need this certificate that badly?" she suddenly asked softly, sitting down next to Arthur. "I'll write you the certificate, Arthur Bennett. You don't have to go to such extremes for it." "No, Doctor, no. Dr. Davies, this isn't for the certificate. This is for life." And Arthur, looking her directly in the eyes, burst out laughing. A few months later, Olivia and Arthur got married. Arthur's mother, happy, incredibly radiant with this happiness, constantly caught her son's eye, and several times, unable to resist, she would glance at Olivia and giggle cheerfully, almost girlishly. Their love was not like an all-consuming passion. They didn't need to be with each other every minute, every second of their lives. They didn't demand or expect sacrifice and selflessness from each other. It was enough for them that they had each other, and neither he nor she needed anything more. Although Olivia did try to get something out of Arthur, without success. "You know, Art, you really should be checked out properly. This is no joke, you know. And you're not exactly a young man anymore, let's say." "Well, you've got yourself problems," Arthur grumbled. "I lived without a care in the world, and now look, a medical examination at home. Olivia, stop it. Everything's fine with me. And anyway, the less you know, the better you sleep." He laughed. "Oh, really?" She shook her head disapprovingly. "Words worthy of a teenager. All right, I won't force you. You're a big boy. It's your life." Olivia did eventually drag her husband for an examination. They examined him for a long, tedious time, sat him down, laid him down, attached some clips, suction cups, then looked at the results with a thoughtful expression. As a result, they told him to avoid strenuous exercise, eat less fried, smoked, spicy, and salty foods. In short, everything that tasted good. However, Arthur paid absolutely no attention to the details. He just wanted to calm Olivia down. He was also prescribed some pills, which Arthur, with honest eyes, swore to Olivia he would take regularly and, naturally, completely forgot about them as soon as he left the house. Arthur loved Olivia very much and was completely happy. Olivia, as far as he could tell, was quite content with life and would have been happy too, if not for one but. Olivia desperately wanted a child, But despite all their efforts, the baby remained only a dream for now. Liv, don't be so upset. We'll have time. What's the rush? Arthur said, sitting next to Olivia on the sofa. My parents had me when they were almost 40, and look, I turned out all right. Do you have any complaints about me? Only substantial ones, please. Jokester! Olivia lightly tapped her husband's head with her fist. Always joking. Well, yes, you certainly have no reason to rush. Olivia shook her head sadly. You, my dear man, are like men and wine. You only get better with age. But I'm a woman, you see. I only get older with the years. Olivia, what nonsense! Where did you pick up such foolishness? Arthur looked at Olivia in surprise. It's not foolishness. It's the truth, Artie. Do you know what they call women like me in medicine if they're expecting a child? Olivia looked at her husband questioningly. Elderly primigravida. She pronounced the unpleasant phrase clearly and smiled bitterly. So you have everything ahead of you, but I need to get moving. And you too, by the way. Olivia shook off her despondency and, as usual, ended the heavy conversation with a joke. Hear that, my beloved husband? Get moving. She jumped up from the sofa and stood before him, fists on her hips. Arthur looked at Olivia, girlishly slim, slender, light, with a head of red hair that hadn't faded at all over the years. He looked at her familiar face, looked into her eyes, in which, as one of their friends said, devils dance, and felt the familiar, demanding, irresistible desire that hadn't diminished with age. He jumped up, grabbed his beloved, and it was as if the higher powers had heard their conversation. Exactly 9 months later, the elderly primigravida, Olivia, who had carried her pregnancy like a 20-year-old girl, gave birth to a boy easily and quickly. Arthur, dazed by the worries, unfamiliar thoughts, and anxieties, held his son for the first time, looking fearfully at the pink, wrinkled face. The answer was an unexpectedly serious gaze. Redhead, the happy father exclaimed. Olivia, he's a redhead, just like you. He's not a redhead at all. Olivia took the baby from Arthur, who stood awkwardly bent over, like all new fathers, afraid to move and drop the precious bundle. He's just golden, our golden boy. They named their son Ethan. Long awaited, hard won, late, of course, he was the light in their window for his parents, a joy and a hope. Ethan grew into a healthy and bright boy. He didn't shine with exceptional talents, but he studied without failing, which is to say, normally. He drew quite well, strummed the guitar, and, like all boys, was engrossed in computer games. But at least he didn't become addicted and allowed his parents to take him to the dacha with pleasure, where shish kebab and pie awaited him. However, these joint family evenings and trips for the three of them became less and less frequent. The reason was Arthur's busy work schedule, his business. By the time Ethan turned 10, Arthur Bennett was already firmly on his feet, owning several workshops and car repair shops. And it all started with that very uncle's workshop, where he began working part-time from his first year at the institute. Childless, significantly aged Frank, a few years after Arthur finished the institute, completely handed over his workshop to his nephew. In doing so, he bargained for the right to come by any time and, if he wished, as he put it, shake off the dust, getting involved in some simple repair work. However, in most cases, Frank's visits amounted to discussing Arthur's skill and business acumen. Look at that, he would explain once again, with heartfelt satisfaction, to some old client or friend. It was me who made Art get into all this back then. Without me, he'd be shuffling papers somewhere now. But with me, He became a master. And what a master. See? Honestly. He's already bought equipment here. It doesn't even fit in the building anymore. You hear him, he says to me. Uncle Frank, he says. I'm opening a second workshop. I'm going to build a network of services. What a fool. You hear that? Can you imagine how they'll tax him now? And he'll take out more loans for the equipment and the rent and the salaries for all those idlers. Does he need that? He should be sitting quietly, tightening nuts for his bread and caviar. He's got golden hands and a brain that works, God bless him. But no, he's climbing God knows where. Frank would break into a coughing fit of an old smoker, shaking his head indignantly and waving his hands, while his eyes shone with pride for his nephew. Arthur's business was large and troublesome, taking up more and more of his time. Arthur, there's something. Ethan and I thought about it, discussed it, and decided to get a dog. Olivia looked carefully at her husband, who unexpectedly stayed home that evening and didn't rush off somewhere, as usual, because of an urgent call. A dog? Arthur was shocked and indignant. Do you even know what a dog in the house is? It's noise, commotion, fur, dirt. They bring all sorts of germs into the house. He thought for a moment and added unnecessarily, fur everywhere, you understand. And most importantly, Liv, you have to walk it, the dog, every day. Olivia looked at Arthur mockingly, and at his last phrase, she burst out laughing. Every day? Really? She shook her head, playfully feigning surprise. I just don't know what to say. You've simply amazed me. Imagine walking every day. I always thought dogs went once a week. You take it out, say, on Tuesday and forget about it until next week. Are you mocking me? Arthur stated, looking at Olivia, who was trembling with quiet laughter. He generally liked dogs, but preferred to do so from a distance, abstractly, so to speak. It so happened that he never had pets in his childhood or youth. True, when he was about 12, to his considerable fright, he was given an aquarium with fish, which, despite all his efforts, somehow quickly and quietly died. Arthur then felt a strange inner relief, which, of course, he carefully hid from his family. Owning a dog, in his understanding, was an extremely complicated matter, involving endless chores and the need to do things you really didn't want to do. For example, dragging yourself outside in the rain and slush instead of lying on a comfortable sofa under a cozy, fluffy blanket and watching your favorite movie. What do you need it for? Arthur made another attempt to influence his wife. Why do you need another dog? Don't you have enough worries with us? Olivia looked into his eyes. I don't have enough worries, can you imagine? And most of all, I don't have enough of you. Olivia took her hands away, moved back, and sat on a stool. And then she suddenly added in a completely different tone. Hearing it, Arthur looked up at Olivia in surprise. He had never heard such a voice from her, dry, somehow alien. I don't understand why you're worried about the inconvenience of a dog. You're never home anyway. What difference does it make to you who lives here? He choked with indignation. And Olivia, not letting him object, continued. I've wanted to talk to you for a long time, my dear. Let's talk now, since things have turned out this way. We miss you. Do you understand? Both of us? All these endless trips, business trips. You've been coming home just to sleep for a long time now. And what's more, we don't even see you at night. Do you think I don't know you've taken to sleeping on the sofa in the living room? Olivia, I do that so I don't wake you up. Arthur looked at his wife with indignation. He was deeply hurt that everything he considered a great personal sacrifice for the sake of the family was now being held against him. Olivia, I work like a dog. I earn money for you, actually, so you can have everything. Arthur was almost shouting. I do all this for you. For you, by the way. You don't have to do it for me, Olivia replied quietly. Do you hear? If you want to do something for me, for Ethan, just please be with us more often and longer. Arthur's throat somehow tightened. Olivia, I'll try, he said, and added, Forgive me, my dear. Try. I forgive you. Olivia looked up at him, tucked her unruly red strands behind her ears with a habitual gesture, and added mockingly, And we're getting a dog anyway. A couple of weeks later, a funny, chubby Labrador puppy, stumbling over his own paws, appeared in the house. Oh, Liv, you even chose a dog that looks like you, just as red. Arthur stumbled, laughing foolishly. The Labrador's eyes were circling a certain coffee table with suspicious persistence. There, clearly within the puppy's reach, lay a plastic folder with business papers. And Arthur really didn't like Sam's intense attention to it, as they named the young hooligan. You two are… Well, anyway, it's good with you, Arthur managed to say, and immediately jumped up with a mournful yelp. It took the puppy only a second to snatch the coveted folder from the table and try to disappear with it into the depths of the apartment. Even when grabbed by the SC scruff of the neck, Sam tried to defend his prize. And the folder, finally in Arthur's hands, was already considerably chewed and slobbered on. Olivia, I take back what I said, he shouted. With you, yes, it's good. But with this parasite, it's impossible. What a rascal. And how did he manage to chew, tear, and slobber on everything so much in just a few seconds? The puppy sat behind Olivia's legs, with an almost human grin on his face, and she laughed cheerfully. This was just the beginning. While Sam grew, Arthur lost count of the ruined shoes, the scratched wallpaper. And as for how many carelessly left documents the tailed shredder ruined, it was beyond counting. And Sam stubbornly chose things that belonged to the head of the family. He just loves you, you see? He loves you in a special way. That's why he chooses what's yours, what smells of you, Olivia would say cheerfully, comforting her husband. Well, then I should be the one to beat him, Arthur joked grimly, sadly examining the latest evidence of the puppy's special love for him. And yet Olivia, as always, turned out to be right. Sam became a true friend to all of them, and even brought their already happy family closer together. Everything collapsed in an instant. Olivia was hit by a car driven by a drunk kid. She was taken to the hospital in critical condition, where she died a few minutes later without regaining consciousness. Arthur learned of Olivia's death by phone. They called him from her mobile phone. Liv, darling, hello, he shouted into the receiver, answering the call. Liv, listen. You're always scolding me. But imagine, I threw everything aside and bought tickets for all three of us to the sea. We're flying on Monday. Come on, arrange your vacation at the hospital right away. Liv. Olivia. Hello? Can you hear me? He suddenly fell silent, feeling rather than hearing the suspicious silence on the line. And suddenly he was afraid. The silence suddenly turned into something sticky and suffocating. It seemed to envelop him, making his heart beat faster and faster. Excuse me? An unfamiliar male voice sounded in the phone. Are you Arthur Bennett? Yes, Arthur rasped back, his voice suddenly hoarse. And who is Olivia Davies to you? Is she your spouse? No, she is my wife, he replied, not understanding the word spouse, not thinking clearly. What kind of spouse was his Olivia? A spouse was something big, awkward, boring, like an old wardrobe. And Olivia was his wife, his beloved, his friend, his sunshine, his happiness for life. I am very sorry, But I must inform you, there has been an accident. She passed away without regaining consciousness. Unfortunately, there was nothing we could do. The unfamiliar voice continued to say something, and Arthur held the phone, gripping it tightly with his fingers, trying to grasp one simple thought. Olivia, his wife, his beloved, his friend, his happiness for life, was gone. The following days passed in a haze, a fog. He went somewhere or drove somewhere, did something, responded to words, handshakes, calls from people. And even he couldn't shake the feeling that it was his double doing all this, while he, the real Arthur, was watching everything from the side. He saw his double pick up Olivia's body from the hospital, saw this same double sit silently next to Olivia's coffin, accompany it to the cemetery, and lower it into the grave. Then this same double returned home, walked the mournful Sam, hugged him, lay down on the sofa, and closed his eyes. The next morning after the funeral, Arthur was completely alone. Even that imaginary double, who had seemingly done all the hard work for him and seen Olivia off on her final journey, disappeared. The morning was sunny and bright. Arthur woke up because a sunbeam was dancing across his face, tickling and blinding him. "Who didn't close the curtains yesterday?" "Some homemaker," he muttered, getting out of bed. "Something's wrong with my mood. Didn't get enough sleep, maybe? And Olivia ran off somewhere early in the morning. Wish she'd come back soon," Arthur thought lazily. "Olivia won't come. Never. You'll never see or hear her again. Never." A ruthless thought flashed in his head. And as if in response to this thought, something tore in his chest with unbearable pain, seemingly crushing his ribs and tearing his insides. A frightened Sam ran around his owner lying on the floor, yelping softly. A frightened, sleepy Ethan ran in at the sound, called an ambulance, which, fortunately, arrived in time. After suffering a heart attack, Arthur, thinner and quieter, realized that he would have to learn to live again. Learn not to think in the mornings why Olivia wasn't calling them for breakfast. Learn to stop waiting for weekends to rush out of town, the three of them. Him, Ethan, and Olivia, taking Sam along. Not to remember that this American movie shouldn't be put on because Olivia couldn't stand the actor in the lead role. He was literally going mad from these constant, uncontrollable lapses into the past and painful returns from there back to reality, where Olivia wasn't. Having regained a little strength, Arthur started going not to the office, but to the car repair shop, and the old, faithful business, to which he had been devoted for so many years, reciprocated. It took him in like a good friend, occupied his hands, time, and thoughts. Arthur gladly put on his old oil-stained overalls, which he hadn't worn for many years, and to the astonishment of the mechanics and everyone else, who looked at him like a demigod, he climbed into the inspection pit. At first, the service workers looked at him with surprise. They felt awkward in his presence. In the eyes of those around him, it was clear. What's gotten into him? This is some nonsense. The man has money to burn, and he's sitting under cars up to his ears in engine oil. All his fingers are bruised. He's eating some rubbish. It's all incomprehensible. Strange. And besides, he's hanging around here unnecessarily. Now we can't even sneak out for a smoke. Days passed. Months went by, and he continued to work regularly in the car repair shop for several hours a day, alongside everyone else. Accustomed to the owner's presence, the workers greeted him warmly and sincerely and called him George among themselves. If he, busy with his main large affairs, suddenly didn't come to the workshop, they understood that he was already missed. "Mary, hello!" the mechanics would shout to the incredibly beautiful young secretary from the central office. "Do you need the boss? He's in the third bay today." Mary would habitually rush in the indicated direction with a stack of documents. Work binges. That's what the company employees jokingly called the times when Arthur disappeared into the workshop. He's gone mad. Uncle Frank, quite old now but still working, diagnosed Arthur. Art, you were a fool, and you still are, even if your head is grey now. You're the owner. What are you rattling around with metal here for? And what should I do? Shuffle papers? Arthur snorted. And who taught me all my life that I should be doing man's work? Well, I'm not taking back my words, but well, the uncle was clearly flustered. It's still somehow wrong. It's because you're alone. You're lonely. That's why you're acting out. You need a woman. Frank, with his directness and spontaneity, hit the sorest spot. Arthur was indeed very lonely. When Olivia was with him, he was never alone for a single second of his life. He felt they were together, even if Olivia was far away. But the pain was there. His mother and Sam were, of course, nearby. But his son, his only beloved, precious boy, did not fill the emptiness that had appeared in the father's life. Olivia's death, for some reason, did not bring Ethan and Arthur closer, as it seemed it should have, but on the contrary, it separated them. 16-year-old Ethan, after grieving for his mother loudly and demonstratively, withdrew into himself, into his own world. To his father's attempts to talk, to become closer, Ethan replied with rude frankness, "Dad, let's be honest. You're not going to replace Mom for me anyway, and you were never much of a father to begin with. No, I have no complaints about money and all that, no question there. But don't try to get inside my head." Arthur tried. Ethan was quite decent, didn't demand anything extra, and didn't have any bad or suspicious habits. But the feeling that he was living in the same apartment with an almost stranger, a completely unknown person, did not leave Arthur. "He should have been thrashed like a stray cat," Uncle Frank would say, as always, simply and categorically. But now, what's the point? And only faithful Sam, waiting for Arthur at home, joyfully greeting his owner's arrival, reminded him of his past happy life. During one of his work binges, Arthur finally kicked the office workers, who had been pestering him with various questions for a long time, out of the workshop, and immersed himself with pleasure in a complex engine repair. The work completely absorbed him, and he didn't immediately notice the female voice coming from the small manager's office. "I called. You booked me for a repair, and now you won't take my car. This is outrageous. I won't leave on principle, do you hear?" "Hello?" Arthur, wiping his hands as he walked, approached the workshop manager, Mark, who was listening to the woman with a pained expression. The lady, judging by everything, was very irritated and accompanied her words with energetic gestures. "May I ask what happened?" He looked at the woman and smiled kindly. However, it wasn't difficult to smile at her sincerely. The lady, despite her nervous mood, turned out to be a pretty young woman of about 25, with large grey eyes, a turned-up nose, and long, light, fluffy bangs that she constantly blew out of her face with a funny, loud exhale. "Hello!" She turned sharply to Arthur. "Another specialist. Do I have to tell my story to everyone here? Maybe instead of talking, one of you will finally work on my car." "My dear girl," Arthur said softly, and was inwardly very surprised by the thoughtlessly but completely sincerely spoken word. After Olivia's death, he had never felt anything remotely resembling emotion towards any woman. "I am not your dear girl," the lady interrupted him decisively. "All right, not dear. Miss," Arthur said, not letting her throw him off. "Let's calm down and figure out the situation. What happened?" Tell it again, she gasped indignantly. Mark! Arthur looked questioningly at the manager standing next to him, who had been staring intently at the problem the whole time. Arthur Bennett. It's simple. Mark stepped forward decisively. The woman. He glanced at the sheet of paper he held in his hand. Sarah Peterson did indeed book with us, but unfortunately, she incorrectly stated the make of her car during the phone conversation, and now it's all clear. I tried to explain to the lady that we can't repair her car because we don't have the equipment for cars of this make. She needs to go to a dealership. But Sarah Peterson won't listen to me. Well, there you go. Mark spread his hands, his whole appearance indicating what he thought of some ladies who didn't understand a thing and didn't want to listen to smart people. I see. Arthur, having listened to Mark, turned his gaze to the woman and smiled slightly. Sarah Peterson. I'm not mistaken. I'm afraid we really can't help you. But I'll write you an address now. Call there. And I think... Listen, I don't care what you think. Your sign says auto service, right? She gestured expressively towards her car. Car? Right? So what? She looked at Arthur ironically. So you're going to fix it? Sarah Peterson, please understand, it's in your best interest. Arthur paused for a few seconds, searching for arguments. If, God forbid, you suddenly get a toothache, you'll go to a dentist, not an eye doctor, right? And if by mistake you happen to go to an eye doctor, you won't demand that he fix your tooth anyway, will you? Mark snorted, trying to stifle his laughter. What nonsense, the woman muttered, feigning inflexibility, although it was already clear that she was tired of arguing. But she decided to have the last word. Fine. I promise I won't let this go. I'll complain to your superiors. And not just some manager or other boss. I'll complain to your owner, the proprietor, I don't know. In short, the one who's in charge here. Really, it's simply unbelievable. A client comes in, and they refuse them. What kind of business is this? She looked indignantly at the service mechanics, who were now openly laughing, having started listening to the conversation and eagerly awaiting how it would end. Well, that's your right. In that case, to not put things off, allow me to introduce myself, Arthur began. What do I care about you? She stamped her foot in indignation. Her rather high heel twisted. The girl swayed and would have fallen if Arthur hadn't caught her arm. A light, barely perceptible scent of tart perfume wafted towards him, and her silky hair brushed his cheek for a second. And suddenly, he felt excitement and surprise. He was alive again, immersed in these forgotten sensations, a little frightened by them. He didn't immediately understand what she was saying. Sarah pulled her arm, which he was still holding, away from him and said, Anyway, get ready. You and you. She quickly pointed a finger at Mark and Arthur. I'll make sure you're fired. Clear? She looked back indignantly at the service mechanics, who were now openly roaring with laughter. The next day, he worked in his office at the firm's central headquarters and was hardly surprised when the door burst open and Sarah entered the room quickly with a stubborn expression on her face. So I have to tell you, with workers like the ones you have there, you'll soon be ruined. I bring my car in, and they refuse to take it. The model, you see, isn't the right one. They're completely brazen, especially one fellow there, not young. Instead of doing his job, he decided to get acquainted with me. As if I care what his name is. He even... She stopped mid-sentence with a smile, looking at Arthur in confusion. After a few seconds, she swept her 2 long bangs out of her face with a gesture familiar to him now and smiled awkwardly. Oh, it's you, the woman said in surprise. Yes, it's me. My name is Arthur Bennett. And you are Sarah Peterson, I remember. He got up from the table and bowed gallantly. You're a jokester. You're the owner of this establishment, it turns out. But then why were you in the workshop looking like that? It's strange. Well, why strange? It's quite normal. It would be strange if I worked in the workshop in a suit. All right, Sarah, let's leave my strange behavior aside. Let's decide what we should do about you. Meaning? She asked, surprised. Well, how? You probably understand. I cannot fulfill your demand to fire everyone, including myself, Arthur said seriously. Sarah looked at him and unexpectedly burst out laughing. Her laughter was so sincere and contagious that Arthur couldn't help but laugh with her, easily and cheerfully, as he hadn't laughed in 2 years. Well, yes, I guess my complaint is hopeless, Sarah said, still sobbing with laughter. All right, Arthur Bennett. It was nice to meet you despite everything. She got up from the chair and extended her hand to him. He took her thin, narrow hand in his and involuntarily covered it with his other hand and held it. Sarah Peterson. Sarah, forgive my boldness, but perhaps you would agree to have dinner with me as compensation for not repairing your car. After all, I must respond to your complaint, mustn't I? He said, himself surprised by his words. Arthur suddenly, for the first time since Olivia's death, wanted to talk to a woman, to touch her hand again, to feel the light, subtle scent of perfume with some unusual tart smell. For Arthur, this was a completely new sensation. All his life, only 2 women existed for him, his mother and Olivia. All other representatives of the weaker sex, even the most beautiful and intelligent, were simply people to him. He was hopelessly lost to romantic adventures. Female charms, which had been tried on him repeatedly, simply had no effect on him. He loved Olivia, wanted to be only with her, and thoughts of experiencing any new sensations related to women simply did not occur to him. Well, if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's Art's faithfulness. Olivia used to laugh. Your husband, by the way, is a catch. Where is he now? Do you even know? At work, you say? Oh, really? Oh, be careful. You'll sit around in your sweatpants and someone will steal your man. Well, if they steal him, then that's fate, Olivia would reply philosophically, but she was being cunning. For some reason, she was completely confident in her Art, and every day in his eyes, she saw that her confidence was justified. So, do you accept the offer? He looked into Sarah's face and smiled. You know what? I do, Sarah suddenly replied. 20-year-old Sarah was charming, yet she made no effort to make any special impression on Arthur, to charm or seduce him. She seemed to care little whether her hair was perfectly in place or if she had eaten all her lipstick along with her steak. By the way, Sarah had an excellent appetite, and for the first time in 2 years, Arthur ate with real pleasure in her company. Despite the age difference of more than 20 years, they found an astonishing number of common topics for conversation. For example, Sarah learned about the Labrador Sam and was overjoyed, being an old dog person herself. Despite the somewhat scandalous start to their acquaintance, Sarah turned out to be a light-hearted, cheerful, kind person. I don't even know what came over me, she laughed, recalling the scene she had made at the workshop. Honestly, I've never acted like that before. It was like I went off the rails. Please forgive me, Arthur Bennett. But first of all, it's not Arthur Bennett, it's Arthur. We agreed, Sarah. Arthur gently chided her. And secondly, because of your spectacular appearance, I'm glad things turned out this way. And I'm glad, very, Sarah suddenly replied. A year later, Arthur, looking younger, with shining eyes and straightened shoulders, sat in his office holding a small velvet box. Inside lay a luxurious ring, a ring for Sarah. I love her. I love Sarah, he thought. Maybe as much as I loved Olivia once, or almost as much. I don't know. What's the point of comparing? I just want her to be by my side as my wife. Always. Well, or at least for as long as it lasts. He became agitated, jumped up, and paced around the office. Okay, what if she says yes? What if she just ignores my age, everything, and says yes? Sarah, she's like that, she might. What should I do? Arthur was afraid to voice the main, essentially the only problem. Ethan. Ethan and his possible reaction to all this. To Sarah. To his father, who suddenly decided to continue living, not just see out his days. Son, I need to talk to you. Every word was a struggle for Arthur. He couldn't sit still, jumped up, and paced the room. He went to the window, deliberately, slowly, and neatly adjusted a fold in the curtain. Then he walked back to the armchair he had just been sitting in, sat down, but after a couple of seconds, stood up again. Ethan hadn't uttered a word the whole time, watching his father. The silence was clearly dragging on. Dad, Ethan finally said, maybe you'll tell me what you wanted. What I wanted to say? Arthur asked senselessly, nervously straightening the perfectly ironed collar of his shirt. His hand was noticeably trembling. Ethan, well, it's hard for me to tell you this, but I want to be honest with you. I'm really counting on you to support and understand me. Anyway, I've met a woman, Arthur finally said, what felt like the hardest words of his life. She's good, smart, decent, beautiful. In short, I like her very much, and it seems, strangely enough, she likes me too. I'd like to introduce you to her, Arthur mumbled, not daring to look up at his son. What about Mom? Came from above his head. What about Mom? Ethan! He finally looked into Ethan's eyes. Mom is gone. She's been gone for a long time. I loved your mother very much, son. Very much. And I still love her and miss her terribly. You know that very well. Miss her? Really? Imagine that. Ethan snorted ironically. But I see that doesn't stop you from getting involved in affairs. Don't you dare talk to me in that tone. Arthur found the strength to look sternly at his son. And choose your words carefully, please. Listen, father. Ethan called him father for the first time in his life, not dad. And this unfamiliar, somehow alien, as if forged word grated unpleasantly on Arthur's ears. Maybe this is some kind of joke? You're playing a trick on me, aren't you? Come on, admit it. No, Ethan, I'm not playing a trick on you. This isn't a joke. I really want to introduce you to Sarah. I don't want to meet any Marina, the boy shouted. Not Marina, Sarah, Arthur corrected his son. Doesn't matter. Marina, Sarah, Karina, or even a tangerine. I don't care. I don't give a damn, understand? Don't you dare bring her here. Got it? Ethan yelled. All right then. Arthur got up from the armchair and paced the room. He barely resisted the urge to slap his son. I dare remind you that this is my apartment, and I will decide what I do, both now and later. Do you hear me? He looked at Ethan. And if you don't like something, well, let's decide. Are we going to live together or not? Arthur's voice did not tremble and did not betray the turmoil that was raging in his soul and head. It seemed he managed to appear decisive and firm, because Ethan stopped shouting and watched his father silently and attentively. And suddenly he blurted out, Are you really going to kick me out of the house because of some— Careful, Ethan? Arthur interrupted his son sharply. Careful. Think before you say something that can't be excused or fixed later. Dad, what are you doing? You're already over 50, and your heart's acting up. Ethan had clearly changed tactics and brought out the heaviest, most ruthless arguments. What kind of courting can there be at your age? It's time for you to retire, think about your pension, and you suddenly decided to start pursuing women in your old age. Ethan was almost shouting, having completely crossed all boundaries. Arthur listened to his son's hysterical outbursts. Of course, Ethan, overwhelmed by resentment and jealousy towards a strange woman, was clearly overdoing it, with the maximalism with which 16-year-olds judge older generations. The boy was talking utter nonsense, and yet Arthur clearly understood the wall of rejection and misunderstanding he was about to face. My God, what am I doing? Arthur suddenly thought clearly, continuing to listen to Ethan's shouts. What am I doing? She's half my age, and Ethan's reaction, it's typical. Everyone will think this, if not say it. Absolutely everyone. Yes, yes, of course I'll marry you, Artie, Sarah exclaimed with delight, throwing modesty aside. I really want to be your wife. Thank you, Sarah. I'm so happy. Only forgive me. We need to talk. He struggled to find and force out the words, although he had already rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in his mind. Sarah, you see, I'm, to put it mildly, not a boy, he mumbled. I understand perfectly, perfectly. I'm not a girl either, Sarah snorted. Sarah, my dear, but you know what I mean, don't you? He sighed painfully. Yes, I know, of course. Her voice became hard. You're significantly older, and I'm unforgivably young. And I'm marrying you solely for your money, to take everything you have and run off abroad with a young lover. Oh, and another thing. You have a bad heart. I can take advantage of that, finish you off, and voila. I'm the heir to everything. They'll definitely tell you that many times too. Sarah, he exclaimed, no, let's talk. Let's say all this nastiness out loud. I know all this perfectly well, Arthur. And I also know that you're ruining everything right now. You're ruining possibly the happiest moment of my life. Artie, my dear, my beloved, let's do this. Sarah wiped away her tears, lifted her face, and looked him intently in the eyes. Either you trust me completely, in my sincerity, in my feelings for you, or right now we say goodbye to each other. He looked into her eyes and believed, once and for all. At least, at that moment, he thought it was forever. Sarah moved into their large apartment, and by that time, Ethan, a second-year student, was living in a dormitory. The relationship between Ethan and Sarah, despite all of Arthur's hopes, was, to put it mildly, separate. Arthur and Sarah and Ethan, even more incomprehensible and unpredictable. Something was clearly happening between him and Sarah, and Arthur tried many times to find out exactly what. Ethan, what's going on? Listen, Father, I'm a man. You yourself poked me in the nose with that recently. Yeah, thanks for the help, his son snorted ironically. Well, actually, you created this problem yourself. You're talking about Sarah, I'm talking about my life. That's it. Leave me alone. His son cut him off. Ethan, don't you dare talk to me like that. The father tried to call his son to order and immediately gave up. Ethan, how about I buy you an apartment? Having gotten nowhere with Ethan, he tried another approach. Sarah, we need to talk. What's going on between you and Ethan? My dear, I won't say everything is perfect, but in principle, it's nothing terrible. It's a typical stepmother and stepson story. Well, stepmothers are never good, but I'm trying very hard. And anyway, she hesitated. Arthur felt that something very important was hidden behind Ethan's aggression and Sarah's playfulness. And this something didn't let Arthur live in peace. It bothered him like a sore tooth. And so he sat on the bench in the park, stroked Sam's golden ears, and thought about what he should do. How could he understand what was happening in his house? And if he suddenly heard something resembling the truth from one of them, he simply wouldn't have the courage to believe it. He had to see and understand everything himself, by himself, and he would have to do it without his son's and wife's knowledge, however disgusting it was to secretly spy on them. David, hello. Arthur dialed his deputy's number. Could you please give me the phone number of the company that installed our video surveillance system? The next day, a quick-witted young man taught Arthur the intricacies of surveillance. The camera is tiny. You can install it anywhere. Higher up is better, so they don't accidentally bump into it. He lowered his voice mysteriously. There's no sound, but the image will be top quality at any distance. The company guarantees it. Having installed the camera in the apartment's living room, Arthur went to work, sank tiredly into the armchair in his office, and turned on his laptop. There was no sound, but the image was clear, just as the technician had promised. Ethan was the first to arrive home. He wandered around the apartment, then returned to the living room and settled directly opposite the camera, turning on the huge, wall-sized television. The boy sat on the sofa in a relaxed, casual pose. Alone in the apartment, he had no need to play the role of the offended or the wronged. His face, so similar to Olivia's face, so familiar and dear, caused Arthur, watching the monitor, a pang of aching, sharp love for his son. He desperately wanted to drop everything, run home, hug this long-legged, tousle-haired, snub-nosed creature, his Ethan, and hold him tight, tight. Ask for forgiveness for everything done and not done. Tell him how much he loved his son. Lost in his feelings, Arthur didn't immediately realize that something was happening in the apartment. Ethan's posture changed. He still remained on the sofa, but he tensed up, as if bristling. The familiar, sullen, angry grimace appeared on his face. On the sofa, instead of the sweet, nice Ethan, a copy of Olivia, sat a wary, angular boy from whom anxiety and aggression literally emanated. Sarah entered the room. Judging by the movement of their lips, they were talking. Sarah smiled slightly, apparently asking Ethan something. He, lounging further on the sofa and putting his feet up on the glass table, put a crooked smirk on his face and, obviously, replied, squinting and barely parting his lips. Sarah turned and left the room. Arthur couldn't hear what they were saying, but one thing was obvious. Ethan was not at all like a miserable outcast with a wicked, suffering stepmother. And Sarah had clearly not turned into a fury in her husband's absence. Rather, it seemed that Ethan was behaving in his usual rude manner, and Sarah was trying to smooth things over with patience and calmness. Arthur, not knowing why, continued to watch his son sitting in the living room. Ethan suddenly looked towards where Sarah had gone, stood up, and moved cautiously, clearly trying not to make noise, towards his father's office. Having disappeared from the frame, he reappeared on the monitor a couple of minutes later. One hand was tucked into his jeans pocket, and it looked very much like he had just put something in there. His chest ached on the left side, a familiar dull pain. Arthur gasped. At that moment, he suddenly felt like an ancient old man who didn't even have the strength to move his legs. So Ethan had betrayed him, after all. Ethan, not Sarah. Ethan was tormenting Sarah and, it seemed, was quietly taking money from the safe in the office. Well, at least that was easy enough to find out. That same evening, upon returning home, Arthur discovered that a rather substantial sum had significantly decreased over the few weeks he hadn't looked in his safe. He didn't talk to his son, but just waited, not knowing what for. And he waited. A few days later, he saw Ethan carry a small rectangular box out of the office, which contained Olivia's few but expensive pieces of jewellery that Arthur had given her. Olivia loved wearing jewellery, calling it our diamond fund. "I need to talk to you," Arthur said the next evening. "Well?" Ethan snapped back habitually. "Money has started disappearing from our house, and not just money." To give Ethan his due, he tried his best to appear calm and indifferent, but he wasn't very successful. "Why are you so sure I took the money?" Ethan smiled awkwardly, or rather bared his teeth, hiding his fear behind it all. "There's another person in our apartment, a complete stranger, by the way. Maybe we should ask her? Maybe our young wife doesn't have enough?" "All right, then." Arthur ground the words through his teeth, feeling the familiar dull pain in his chest. "The money, of course, if it's still intact, you can keep. Give back the jewellery and get out." Ethan left the room. A few minutes later, he returned. "Here's all your money." He threw the wallet at his father's feet. "I didn't take a single ruble. You can count it. But I won't give you the jewellery. I'll keep it. You can call and report a theft. I don't care. I won't give them back, even if they send me to prison. These are Mum's jewels. I won't let some strange woman wear them. Do you hear?" By the end of the sentence, Ethan's voice, trembling more and more, completely broke, and the boy, unable to bear it, sobbed. Arthur stared at his son with wide eyes. It was as if the shell of bitterness, cynicism, and lies was licked away from Ethan's face. Before him stood his beloved, only son, his and Olivia's, their golden boy, confused and lost in his fantasies and delusions. But still his own Ethan, still hopelessly missing his mother, and having driven that longing so deep inside that it had turned into hatred. Hatred towards his father, Sarah, towards the whole world around him where his mother wasn't. "Ethan, forgive me," Arthur said softly. Ethan raised his tear-stained face to his father and said quietly, in a barely audible whisper, "And you forgive me, Dad. Forgive me for this. And for Sarah. I love you, Dad." Arthur took a few steps and squeezed his son's outstretched hand with all his might. And around them, jumping and barking happily, his golden fur shining, not knowing what he was so happy about, was Sam.